left preached to the nation and to the world that regardless of whether we agree, everyone must be included and tolerated, and honest and open dialogue must be started so we can understand each other and come to common ground. You can almost hear Rodney King choking back the tears, right?
I just want to say, can we all get along? Can we get along? Can we stop making it horrible for the older people and the kids?
Today's left, and especially today's fascist far left, and that's what they are, by definition, has abandoned its disingenuous dedication to tolerance and inclusion and has descended to authoritarian totalitarianism. They embrace elitism to the point of believing that there should be different sets of rules, regulations, and laws depending on a person's politics and ideology. The results of this survey should be chilling to each and every American. It's certainly chilling to those immigrant Americans who escaped the oppressive and totalitarian rule of the Soviets because they understand this mindset, this fascist and authoritarian mindset, for what it is, an attempt to define and then limit freedom. The idea that almost half of Democrats believe the unvaccinated should be rounded up, detained, and put into camps until they abandon their freedom of choice where health is concerned, a sick irony considering their argument of my body, my choice, where the abortion pro-choice movement is concerned, by the by, is beyond the well-acknowledged immorality of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's Japanese internment camps and more akin to how the communist Chinese are treating their Uyghurs. This alarming elitist narcissism is compounded by 1/3 of those same survey respondents believing the government should interject itself into the family unit, thanks to the employment of Hillary Clinton's family-deprecating it-takes-a-village Marxist mindset, to forcibly take children from their parents should their parents not be comfortable enough with taking poorly vetted, DNA-altering COVID vaccines. It's important to note that as of today, Britain has discontinued all COVID restrictions to include vaccination and mask mandates, the use of vaccine passports, mandatory COVID tracking, gathering and travel restrictions, along with every other restriction that was enacted to combat the pandemic. Today, Britain joins other countries who now recognize COVID as something we must treat endemically, like influenza, and something that must be marginalized by herd immunity in the primary. But this isn't about COVID, or the ideological, societal, and political division that the fear-mongering of the politically opportunistic and media classes foisted upon the American people. It's about the fact that close to half of those who identified as Democrats have completely abdicated any fealty to the Bill of Rights and our core American individualism. Contrary to what Wilsonian Democrats, and you can read that as fascist progressives, contrary to what they believe, the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights are not malleable to the times. The U.S. Constitution lays out the structure of our government and how it is to operate, and the Bill of Rights clearly defines the government's limitations on our inalienable rights. Both documents were written in a way that makes them timeless, meaning they can be applied to any age as they exist and still remain relevant and omnipotent. If the fascists of today understood the term living document to mean agelessly omnipotent, that would be one thing, but they don't. If we're to have any fidelity to the American individualism that was created for each of us through the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, then the adage that an individual's right to throw a punch necessarily ends where another's nose begins must be accepted as a rule and not a suggestion, or a rule with morally relativistic exceptions, less criminality. Understanding that public health emergencies will arise and there may be short-term mitigating circumstances, and the optimal word here is short-term. Any government intervention must be extremely minimal and absolutely temporary, and any remedy prescribed for the public good must be thoroughly vetted, tested, and devoid of any profiteering or political opportunism. The COVID event held none of the aforementioned reasonable and responsible restrictions that should have reined in the government's intervention into our freedoms. The COVID event also red-flagged the fascists among us, fascists that have been created and cultivated by the fascist progressives born of the Wilsonian era, when our government under Woodrow Wilson was in fact a fascist government, and one recognized as such by foreign leaders and domestic politicians alike. If our republic, our constitutional republic, is to change course and head back towards the sovereignty of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, then the majority of us, and that's roughly about 86.8%, must communicate to the aforementioned Democrat subset, roughly 13.2%, that we will not allow a tyranny of the minority to impose fascism on the total of the American people. At this point, it isn't about Democrat versus Republican or left versus right. It's about those who believe in freedom fighting off those who would cede our freedoms for their own selfish beliefs. The selfish, that 13.2% that is so childishly enamored of nanny state socialism delivered through fascism, must be educated on their nihilism and defeated at all cost. As Benjamin Franklin said, those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. When I come back, let's talk a little bit about Joe Biden's pro-regulation Fed nominee, Sarah Bloom Raskin. You're listening to Underground USA. My name is Frank Salvato. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after a word from those who make this possible.
I'm Judson Carroll, and I'm an herbalist. I'd like to invite you to listen to my show, the Southern Appalachian Herbs Podcast. It's available wherever you like to listen to podcasts. It's a show with a conservative Christian worldview, and it's about a lot more than just herbal medicine. It's about an independent way of life, being more self-reliant, less reliant on the government, the medical industry, the pharmaceutical industry, and the supply chain. With freedom comes responsibility. Sometimes that responsibility is putting food on the table. Other times it's caring for yourself and your family with home remedies. So give it a listen. I think you'll enjoy it, and it may just save your life.
Welcome back to Underground USA. My name is Frank Salvato. Be sure to sign up for everything we do over there. Go to undergroundusa.com. Subscription box will pop up. Put your email address in there. We bring it directly to you without filtering it through the social media censors. What a novel concept. And yet another in a never-ending display of just how tone-deaf the Biden administration is. President Biden announced 3 new nominations for the Federal Reserve Boards of Governors, including far-left, pro-government intervention Sarah Bloom Raskin. She was nominated for the central bank's top regulatory spot. Biden nominated Raskin to serve as vice chair for supervision, and academic economists Lisa Cook and Philip Jefferson to fill the remaining vacancies on the 7-member board. If approved through the Senate confirmation process, Cook would be the first black woman to serve on the Fed's board, while Jefferson would be the 4th black man to do so. Additionally, the board would, for the first time in its history, consist of a majority of women. Okay, bravo, if they're qualified. As vice chair of supervision, Raskin would oversee annual stress tests that examine bank safety and liquidity. Many on the far left believe that Raskin will appear to take a tougher stance against Wall Street than her predecessor. But many in the political center and on the right are indicating serious concerns about her push to establish market-killing financial regulatory policies for cryptocurrencies and extending the Fed's mission statement to favor policies that attempt to co-opt the global economy under the ruse of climate change. By the way, Raskin's husband, Representative Jamie Raskin, Democrat from Maryland, he led the second impeachment trial of former President Trump, just to put things in context. Speaking to reporters, a Senate Banking Committee aide said, Senate Republicans have serious concerns about Ms. Raskin's desire for the Fed to engage in mission creep by exceeding the bounds of its narrow statutory mandate in order to pursue a liberal social agenda, particularly on climate. U.S. Senator Pat Toomey, Republican from Pennsylvania, the ranking member on the Senate Banking Committee.
In a statement to Bloomberg, he said if she is nominated, she would abuse the Fed's narrow statutory mandates on monetary policy to have the central bank actively engage in capital allocation. Such actions not only threaten both the Fed's independence and effectiveness, but would also weaken economic growth. So he said that she had put pressure on the banks or written about the choke-off credit to traditional energy companies and exclude these employers from many Fed emergency lending facilities.
Important to note here is the vulnerability of the economy and the solid record of government intervention in the free market working to the detriment of the American people. Also important to understand is the fact that while the members of the Federal Reserve Board are nominated by the President and confirmed by the Senate, those appointed to the board don't serve at the pleasure of the President. The Federal Reserve, although the authority over our banking system, isn't part and parcel of the U.S. federal government's purview. The Fed is an independent entity of the private sector with governmental powers, as explained by thebalance.com. Quote, the Federal Reserve is the central banking system of the United States, and it's been around for over a century. The Panic of 1907 spurred President, and here he is again, Woodrow Wilson, to create the Federal Reserve System. He called for a National Monetary Commission to evaluate the best response to prevent ongoing financial panics, bank failures, and business bankruptcies. Congress then passed the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. Congress originally designed the Fed to provide for the establishment of Federal Reserve banks, to furnish an elastic currency, to afford means of rediscounting commercial paper, to establish a more effective supervision of banking in the U.S., and for other purposes. Since then, Congress has enacted legislation to expand the Fed's powers and purpose. Today, the Fed enacts monetary policy to manage inflation, maximize employment, and stabilize interest rates. It also oversees the banking system to protect consumers, unquote. But as they also explain, the actions undertaken by the Federal Reserve have a significant impact on each and every one of us every day and absolutely affect the worth of our accrued wealth. The board's decisions have a direct effect on stocks and bond mutual funds as well as our loan rates, thus giving an indirect effect on the values of our homes and even our chances of being laid off and or rehired. Appointing more conservative members to the Fed board usually results in a more ingenuous fidelity to the unique American capitalist free market system because the commissioners tend to be reluctant to interfere in a regulatory manner, allowing for the strength of the free market elements of the U.S. economy to thrive. It's for this reason the economies crafted by both Reagan and Trump thrived. They appointed non-interventionalists to the Federal Reserve Board. As explained by Stephen Nicholas of Investopedia.com, the free market and capitalism are not interchangeable references to the same economic systems. Capitalism centers on the creation of wealth, open competition, and individual incentives, as well as private sector ownership of the capital, means of production, and product distribution. A truly free market system, by contrast, centers exclusively on the exchange of wealth or goods and services as is dictated by demand and supply from buyers and sellers, with no government intervention. Read regulation. The United States is, in actuality, a mixed economy. Although elements of the free market are integral to the U.S. market, there's an overabundance of state and federal oversight, taxation, and regulation that exists, especially in sectors prone to special interests. A cursory examination of Raskin's professional history indicates that she's not shy about imposing special interest promoting regulations on the markets to effect a preferred outcome. She's a social engineering ideologue, and her positions on regulating the cryptocurrency sphere, as well as